So, last Sunday, Jesus was in his hometown of Nazareth, offending the old hometown folks, if you will. Remember with me that they drove Jesus out of their town with the intent to hurl him off a cliff. But Jesus ghosted them. He passed through the midst of them, going on his way. Today, we come to Jesus on the shore of Lake Gennesaret, more commonly known as the Sea of Galilee. All along the way in Luke's gospel, Jesus has been encountering people, often great crowds of people, even encountering some unclean spirits he deals with. He goes into the home of Simon, where Jesus heals Simon's mother-in-law of her fever. And in Luke's gospel, Simon wasn't even yet a disciple of Jesus's. Jesus continued preaching in the Judean synagogues. I love the fact that every step of the way with this, I admire Jesus' authenticity to his mission, his tenacity, his willingness to teach and to heal and to preach wherever he was. And finally, this morning, Jesus is on the shores of Lake Gennesaret, preaching to the crowds, to Simon and his partner James and John, to the great crowds as well as to us. What does Jesus come upon at that shoreline but another opportunity to teach, to be with people again, with the experience of said people pressing in upon him. And that, just reading that and saying it out loud, people pressing in upon Jesus, that makes me uncomfortable. Even before the pandemic, the way that we're spaced out now, I think just because we have our pews and we have social distancing, before the pandemic, I didn't want anyone pressing in upon me. No, I certainly don't now as well. But pre-pandemic, I needed my space. I preferred the less expensive lawn seats at River Bend for the Jimmy Buffett concerts we enjoyed, with space to spread out rather than crowds of humanity all pressing into me closer to the stage. Give me the back rows with that stuff. Well, Jesus must have needed a bit of space that day, too. He sees two boats. The fishermen weren't even on their boats anymore. They were out on the beach washing their nets from a night's worth of unsuccessful fishing on the water. He gets into Simon's boat, and Jesus asks Simon to put out a bit from the shore so he could teach the crowd from the boat. And at this moment, I can hear Jesus practically sighing, as he's out in that boat, 10, 15, 20 yards maybe from the shore, and from all those people pressing in on him. I know that's what I would be doing, as Simon moved that boat out a bit from the crowd. Jesus taught the crowds for a bit, but then he turns away from the crowds, and he turns, I believe, to an already exhausted Simon. Remember with me that Simon had been fishing all night. He'd been fishing all night and was preparing his gear to be stored away for the next night. And Jesus, the carpenter's son, that Jesus, has the audacity to say to Simon the fisherman, "Put out into the deep water and let your nets down for a catch." What in the world? Simon was done fishing for the day. He was cleaning his fishing nets when Jesus got into the boat. The kind of nets that Simon used were most likely made for use during the night, when the fish wouldn't be able to see the net around them and they would be more easily caught in the cover of darkness. And now, Jesus, the carpenter's son, wants Simon to use those nets again in broad daylight after a night of unsuccessful fishing. And Simon was chomping at the bit for a nap. I know I would be. Simon couldn't have been too happy about this. In fact, just recounting it, I'm kind of angry for Simon, except that we know the ending to the story. Couldn't have been too happy, but yet he did it anyway. "Master, we've worked all night long but have caught nothing. Yet if you say so, I will let down the nets." But this time, those half-cleaned nets that were meant to be put away and used again that next night were pulled back out and used to catch so many fish that those nets started to break. Simon's boat had to signal his partner's boat to come and to give them help. These two boat crews hauled in so many fish that both of their boats were now beginning to sink. That's pretty crazy. Jesus provided those fisher folk with one amazing, miraculous catch of fish. But the story of Simon and the story of the nets and all isn't about the fish. The story isn't about the boat or the crowds of people on the shoreline. nor about Jesus needing a bit of space away from the crowd. This story today is about the overflowing abundance of God's love. Simon might well have not appreciated Jesus instructing Simon to go back out into the deep again. But we can be certain he was elated to have listened to Jesus after that miraculous catch. Simon would have been tired on that shoreline. Can any of us relate today to being physically tired? Simon would have been emotionally and spiritually tired as well. He wasn't out there fishing for the sport of it. Simon was fishing for his survival. And he'd been skunked the night before. Skunked is a word fisher folk use when they don't catch a thing. If I've been fishing all day and I didn't even get a strike or a bite, I would come home and say I got skunked. Simon had been skunked. Simon may well have been at his breaking point. I'm not talking about the fishing nets breaking. It wasn't cheap to fish on the Sea of Galilee. There were hefty fees and there were taxes imposed on them. You didn't get a denarii with empty nets back at the shoreline. Can we relate to that? That frazzled feeling, that exhaustion feeling, that feeling of what am I going to do next? That feeling of just like being physically and spiritually uncertain of ourselves? Well, I'll share a brief tale, as you knew I would. I spent Friday night and part of Saturday trying to figure out how I was going to get myself over to this church building today to be able to lead worship with you all. We know that life in the world is especially weird and peculiar today. We know there are jobs available, that's what we hear, and we also know that employers are short-staffed, and that goes all along the spectrum, with churches, with big businesses, with small businesses. We did really well. We got our church sidewalk area cleared. Our snow removal company does a great job. They were able to get that clear for worship today. But with their shortage, they were not able to get the rectory stuff done. And I'm usually extremely understanding all that. Normally it wouldn't be a big deal. I'd put my boots on and go out and shovel some and make a path to get wherever I needed to get. But with the boot, it's impossible. Like if I slip and fall with the boot and mess up my foot more, y'all don't want to hear me talking about this anymore, so this has got to heal. All right? So it was an impossibility for me to be able to deal with the snow. It was an impossibility for me with the grounds looking. You don't realize it when you look at that rectory, but under normal circumstances, like when you take that sidewalk up to the front of the rectory, that's a big hill. If you're on one of these and you're pushing with your foot, or worse yet, if you're sliding down it looking to see for ice, which there wasn't any, thanks to Don and Melissa. But anyway, I could see the church building from my porch, but I knew with the current conditions there wasn't any way I was getting over here without the walks having something done. Thanks to Don and Melissa, to Kim and to Barbara and to Lucas and Nathaniel for their snow removal, their ice picking, and their salting, I was able to get to the church building today and be with us for worship. I couldn't have been here otherwise. My sincerest thanks to all of you. I would have had my own boys, actually, they're probably glad of this. I would have had them do all the work, except that I didn't think they'd get very far with the ice and a plastic snow shovel from Walmart. So, be thankful, boys, that there was ice. And that's just my little episode of trying to get here on Sunday morning. That's just my own thing that threw my Saturday off. There are folks with COVID. There are folks who are dying from COVID, or who have died from COVID. There are people who do not have work. There are people who have injuries like this who don't have a supportive community to say, sure, I'll come and help you, dig you out. There are people who don't have spouses who are able to drive them around and get them to the accessible side of the building. There are people with really deep, real issues and problems to where they are spiritually and physically exhausted. There are folks for whom that you have family issues we will never know about. There are people sitting in here right now who have family issues we will never know anything about, that are deep-seated and are a big thing for them right now in their lives, and they're carrying that on their own. I don't know that for a fact. I'm just guessing with the odds. Like, that's just the way the world is. If we're honest, we will know exhaustion. Simon, though, was willing to listen to Jesus, to accept Jesus' command, and then to follow Jesus. This morning's story is a story about God's abundant love that is so overflowing that it took 2 whole fishing vessels to bring that catch to shore, and they nearly drowned trying to do so. For Simon to experience this catch, he was willing to listen. He accepted Jesus' words, and then he went out and he followed Jesus after. We have the exact same opportunities today. And our challenge is, are we willing to listen to God? Are we willing to accept Christ's direction in our lives, to look and to listen, to ask, and then to accept it? Are we then willing to follow wherever the Spirit leads? We aren't guaranteed an easy ride of it, even when we do. I mean, I know it was still hard to get around into the church building and slide down and get over here, all the different things. But it was possible due to the hard work of those folks. Living in a pandemic is all sorts of grief and hardships, but yet throughout it, we have been present to one another. We have access to vaccines and face masks and many other common and really easy practices to abide by. When we are emotionally and when we are spiritually struggling in life, we can choose to look to others to be with us. I had a perfect example yesterday. I didn't even share this example with my spouse yet. I was up in bed frustrated and just upstairs laying there, and my good friend Sherilyn texted me and said, "Why don't we go get coffee and I'll drive you around?" And you know what this priest did, don't you? I said, "No, I'm going to take a nap," which didn't help matters any. But we can open ourselves to that. We can be real with one another, and we can share our suffering and our hurt. I can't fix your hurt. You can't fix one another's hurt, but we can be present to each other in it. We need to listen, to accept, and to follow Jesus' guidance. When we do, I believe that all sorts of remarkable things can happen. We'll sense a truer, a fuller connection with God. Instead of nets near breaking with fish, our hearts then overflow with abundance of deep love and gratitude. To get to experience deep love and gratitude, we must acknowledge that we cannot. Simon fished all night, and remember, he got skunked. But God can. Put out into the deep, let down your nets one more time with me in the boat with you. Listen, accept, and follow Jesus' guidance. We'll be glad we did.